saying this is a real threat. We really might walk out on October 1st. Now, that is sort of the type of thing that union leaders do, but we are getting pretty close to the deadline there. So if a strike does happen, we might not notice much disruption if it's, say, a few days or a week or two, but the longer it drags on, the bigger.
Oh,
All right, so the recording is in progress. Welcome, everyone. This is the 1619 gathering for the month of September, and we're honored to have a very special guest here. We have Betty Kilby Baldwin joining us, who is one of the pioneers of the civil rights movement. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing her. You can read about her on our website, and there's a link on there to her website where you can learn a lot more about who Betty is and what she's done. But what she's going to do today is she's going to sit and visit with us about her 60 plus years of experience in the civil rights movement, and tell us something about what it was like to be a part of it and where we are and where we're going. So with that, I'm just turning it over to you, Betty, and Betty is running the meeting from here on, and do run it however you want, Betty, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
okay. Thank you, Dick. Well, today I'm going to tell you primarily about my book, Wit, Will, and Walls, and some of the things that I wrote in that book. Now, in the very introduction of that book, I tell you, we cannot reject the past, nor can we change the past. And it is not my desire to blame or make anyone feel guilty about anything. It's written to encourage, to educate, and to motivate. And you know that when we talk about my history, it's being banded in schools, school books. If my book, Wit, Will, and Walls, was in the schools right now, it would be on the ban list because people think that it's going to make people feel bad. But then I asked myself, well, what about me? How about my feelings? Who's worried about me and who's worried about my feelings? But anyway, I will move on, and I am going to tell you my story. It starts with my father. My father grew up on the Finks farm with his family. Their meager existence was a step above slavery. They were considered to be tenant farmers, but not knowing how to read or to write, how could they understand the accounting process? Well, he watched, he listened, and he learned the best that he could. But like most teenagers, at 17, he thought he had all the answers. He approached old man Dick Finks, as we had called him during those times, and he asked about his wages. Well, old man Dick Finks told him that he had consumed everything that he earned and that he owed him money. My dad didn't understand. After all, he only had a fourth grade education. As soon as he was old enough, he was forced to go into the fields and work rather than to be able to go to school. One day, after a long, hard day at work, he threatened to leave. To entice him to stay and continue to work on the farm, Finks gave him 24 acres of land and a rundown shack. Well, Daddy saw himself as a landowner, and he felt quite accomplished. He worked so hard, trapping and doing extra jobs, he never seemed to get ahead. He couldn't find a way to turn this property into a livable home. While he didn't have enough money to fix the house, he could afford a car. And besides, he could make money with the car providing a taxi service to the school teachers in his area. On one of his trips to the school, he fell in love with my mom. Well, my mom never worked outside the home. Her dad owned their farm. And without thinking, he married this high society girl and took her back to the Finks farm. Well, the Finks was all too happy with Daddy's new bride. They were all set to send her to the farm down the road. Well, my mom wasn't having it. And Daddy came to his senses and realized that his excitement, he failed to have a plan, a good plan, that is. Mom went back to live with her daddy, and my dad had a commuting marriage until he could come up with a better plan. Daddy left the Finks farm, got a factory job with the help of his brothers-in-law. He bought a land in Happy Creek, built a house and a barn. He bought cows and hogs and chickens. When he moved into this house, he had 3 children, and the children kept on coming. He worked a full-time factory job and ran the 52-acre farm. He was living the American dream. Then one day, old man Dick Finks came back and told him he wanted that 24 acres of land back. Daddy told him, I paid for that land with my blood, sweat, and tears. It didn't matter. My grandfather took my daddy to court, claiming that he had made the down payment on the property and that he actually owned the land. And all in one day, his father testified against him. The white judge, white jury took his land, and there was nothing that he could do. He went to the field that day, and he stretched forth his hands, and he wept and he prayed. When he got up, he vowed that he would do everything humanly possible to give his children a good education. Because if they didn't have a good education, he knew that they would be taken advantage of in the same manner. When my brother was ready to complete the 7th grade, my daddy sent him away to boarding school some 50 miles away. My brother's name was Jimmy. Jimmy got in trouble stealing milk because he was so accustomed to being able to eat anytime he wanted when he was at home. Well, the school saw it a little bit different. They told him that he would lose his bus privileges. And the first thing he did was he called his daddy. And when my father went down to talk to the people at the school, they told him he lived outside the county, so he didn't have a voice in the county. Well, my daddy went to the school board. I don't know who said what to whom, but Jimmy got his bus privileges back. And he was able to come home every weekend on the bus. Well, the following year, my brother John graduated from the 7th grade. And Daddy was offered to send my 2 brothers to a school on a daily commute, which was 26 miles away. Boys had to walk a half a mile to meet the bus. My brother John developed sinus problems. And with sinus problems, there's medical bills. And so that option didn't work for my father either. The following year, my father had 3 children to be enrolled in high school. His 3rd child was a girl. That was me. He refused to subject me to the elements that my brothers had experienced. Besides, he never forgot his mother working in the white man's kitchen, nor did he ever forget about why and how he lost his land. And he drew a line in the sand. He was determined to change the outcome for his children. If you keep on doing the same thing the same way all the time, you're an idiot if you expect different results. And so he knew that if he continued to do the same thing, the results would always be the same. He had heard about the landmark Supreme Court Brown decision of Topeka, Kansas, that segregated schools. He learned that the Brown decision, that it was unconstitutional. And not only did he learn that the Brown decision outlawed segregated schools, he learned that it was not just one case, but 5 cases. They came from the North, the South, the East, and the West. And to him, that was big time. But there was more. He learned that one of those cases was Prince Edward County, right there in Virginia with us. And he found out that years later, still nothing had happened. But then there were also 3 more cases in Virginia: Charlottesville, Norfolk, and Arlington. And Virginia was on the move with trying to implement this Brown decision. Well, he pondered and he prayed, and he said, surely God would not give him a solution if it were not possible. He gathered up his supporters from the NAACP. They decided that they should go to Richmond and meet with Attorney Hill, who was the attorney in the Prince William case. And so they got all excited. They made their plans and they went to see the lawyer. Well, they forgot to make an appointment. They showed up at the lawyer's office and the secretary said, well, he's in a meeting. He'll be out soon. And she asked if they had an appointment. Well, they glanced at each other and then they said no, but they were willing to wait. When Attorney Hill was finally free, Daddy was the first one to start the conversation. He forgot his manners and his social grace. He jumped right in and said, we heard about that Brown decision and we want our children to go to the only high school in the county. We're tired of broke down buses and substandard education. Well, Attorney Hill began to ask questions. He said, am I understanding that you only have one high school in the county? Daddy answered, man, what did I just say? Attorney Hill said, it won't be easy. Daddy said, I've never had easy. I don't know what that feels like. Attorney Hill said, once we start, there's no turning back. The group all together said, we didn't come this far to stop now. And at last, they had themselves a solution and they had themselves a lawyer. On August the 28th, 1959, Oliver Hill filed Betty Ann Kilby and all versus the County School Board of Warren County, Virginia. Civil Action 530. It was on. In the meantime, the Virginia legislators were putting together some laws called the Massive Resistance Laws that gave the governor the power to close the schools in Virginia that was ordered to integrate. And that integrated schools would not be entitled to receive any funds from the state treasury. Well, during the summer of 1958, we made numerous of trips to Harrisonburg court. Because I was the named plaintiff, they wouldn't let me testify. They said that it would put a target on my back and I would be open to threats and intimidation. Well, the Kilby name was already associated with being troublemakers and leaders in disrupting everybody's life in Front Royal, colored and white. And the federal court judge, John Paul, he did order the school board to admit 22 Negroes to Warren County High School. The governor of Virginia closed the schools they closed the schools under the Massive Resistance Laws. And they also closed the schools in Prince Edward County that was part of the initial Brown case. They also closed the other cases in Virginia, Charlottesville, Norfolk, and Arlington. By September the 12th, 1958, approximately 12,700 students in Virginia was locked out of public education. Our case had far-reaching effects. Governor Fabolous of Little Rock, Arkansas, also closed Central High School, which had been desegregated in September of 1957. You know that there were appeals. And on January the 9th,
Just put it in the refrigerator. Put the fruit in there.
You have to mute, Dick.
Yeah.
well, you know that there were appeals. And on January the 19th, 1959, the Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals declared that both the school closing and cutting off state funds to prevent racial integration in Virginia public schools violated the Virginia Constitution. Massive resistance laws were declared unconstitutional. In Warren County, they petitioned the judge to not make them desegregate the schools, but they lost on the appeals and Warren County was ordered to open just like the rest of the schools. In my book, Wit, Will, and Wall, on page 100, I write, I was at the kitchen sink washing dishes when I saw what seemed to be lightning go past the window. But the loud blast told me that it was not lightning. Mama screamed and Daddy yelled gunfire, hit the floor. The last thing I remembered was the dog giving a howl. I woke to Mama slapping my face, crying hysterically. She thought I was shot. I was just a scared little girl and I fainted. Well, that night we went to church because we had to plan for the next day. As Daddy was telling the group what happened with the gunfire, I heard his fears. I think Reverend Frank did too, because he began to pray and we all called on God. We knew about the little girl in Arkansas who missed the meeting and was terrorized by the white mob. I understand what it's like to be scared to death. You don't die, but you know what death feels like. The next day when my fears were an all-time high, I thought about Jesus when he asked God if he could take that cup from him. Jesus knew it was his last time. I told Mama that I was sick. She said, you have butterflies in your stomach, and as soon as you feed them with some of these pancakes, you'll be all right. With every bite, I thought those pancakes was going to jump up and smack me in the face. Then, as I walked to the door, Mama yelled to my brothers, you take care of your sister now, you hear? You hear me? When we finally got to the school and we had to park at the foot of the hill and we got out the car, I froze momentarily as I looked at the crowd. My brother Jimmy pushed me to keep me moving. Then I heard this woman's voice from the crowd. We're going to kill all you little niggers. I was so scared, I began to recite the 23rd Psalm. I only got to, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. One of the other children must have heard the woman because someone with a good singing voice began to sing, we shall overcome. During those difficult days, I thought that death would have been more humane than living through the trauma, day after day, month after month, and year after year. It was 1963. Both my brothers had graduated and left home. The number of African-American students at Warren County High School were so small, we couldn't band together to protect one another. Just as I had heard my father declare and decree so many times before, I declared and decreed that I was not going to be afraid anymore. I forgot all about that nonviolent training. One day, as I took the shortcut through the auditorium, I was attacked by 3 boys. It was the thing that almost broke my spirit. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I wanted to die. I tried to will myself to die. I would hold my breath until I fainted, but it didn't work. Then I began to race in my father's car. I raced the boys in our neighborhood, in our dangerous winding road. One day while I was racing, I hit some chickens in the road. Then I yelled, fried chicken tonight. But the next day, the owner put the chicken in a crate along the roadside. Every time I went past her house, I saw that chicken along the roadside in the crate, and I knew that I had hurt that chicken. It hurt me so bad that one day I stopped to confess, hoping that she would throw me in the well and kill me. Instead, she made me promise to stop racing, and she hugged me, and I cried like a baby. I ended up in the hospital. The orderly belonged to our church. He came to my room. He sat on the foot of my bed and he asked, what's wrong with you, child? I answered, I want to die. He asked, how long have you been in that school? I said, 5 years. I graduate in June. He said, God gave you a big job, but it's almost over. The best part of your life is ahead of you. And I believed him. I survived those 5 years of trauma. I couldn't participate in normal teen activities. I was robbed of my youth and my innocence. However, the experience prepared me for the journey ahead. When I graduated from high school, I couldn't even get into college. My grades didn't show that I would succeed in college. I applied to HBCUs thinking that I had made an important contribution to history. Any college would be glad to have me. They would recognize my potential. They didn't. I didn't get accepted, and I was lost again. So I got married and had my children. 16 years later, I read in the newspaper that I could take 5 cases at Shenandoah University and get a management certificate. When I enrolled my 4 children in school, I decided to check out these classes at Shenandoah University. I was enrolled in college, and no one asked for my transcript or asked me about what color I was. All I could think about was I was taking back what the devil stole from me. I was going to get my education after all. I started with 1 class per semester. Eventually, I was hired on to a Fortune 500 company that had a tuition reimbursement policy. And the next thing you know, I was working full time, going to school full time, making good grades. Hallelujah. With each education accomplishment, I would apply for another job. I was trying to climb the corporate ladder, as I read in the books. This company would pay for my education and fight me tooth and nail to keep me out of management. The one thing that I had learned from integrating the schools was the art of war. I applied for so many jobs, had great interviews, was turned down more times than I admit. The title of chapter 7 in my book, Whitwell and Walls, is On the Wings of a Past. And I write, it was no longer my ancestors showing great strength, courage, endurance, perseverance, determination, faith, moving forward with hope and prayers. It was my daddy, Charlie Dean and Sam Fletcher, young men and women from my community. They were ordinary people with little formal education, working menial jobs. I was too young to understand the full impact of their dream, but I knew that bullets fired at the house couldn't stop them. Cross burning in the yard couldn't stop them. Bloody sheets on the mailbox couldn't stop them. Mutilation of the livestock couldn't stop them. No form of intimidation or threats on their lives could stop them. They collectively dreamed of economic prosperity for their children, and that dream was shatterproof. I noticed that there was another group of people outside my immediate community showing great strength and courage, moving forward with hope and prayers. This man was called Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was as unstoppable as my daddy and the leaders from Happy Creek. When he delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech at the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, I was old enough to understand. He verbalized that the dream that my daddy had tried to instill in us during integration. Under the leadership of Dr. King and the blood of numerous civil rights activists, African Americans marched, protested, and they gave their lives in a struggle for our rights under the Constitution. President Lyndon Baines Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act on July the 2nd, 1964. It guaranteed that no person in the United States shall, on the ground of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or subject to discrimination. Yet I was a part of the change. All this time, God was preparing me. The time had come for me to pick up my cross and go forth. I believed that I had paid my dues and then some. I fought having to step forth and fight discrimination on the job. Dr. King gave his life for the cause. When I wanted to die, God wouldn't take me. I know I wanted to give up and not die for the cause. God knew too. I had learned when God gives you a job to do, it's easier to simply say, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. He had allowed me to become educated. He had entered the battle with me, and we won. I took the credit and acted as though I had made all the accomplishments all by myself. He brought me to my knees, and there in the midst of the storm, I finally threw up my hands and surrendered to his will. My struggles didn't extinguish my self-respect, crush my ambition, or paralyze my efforts to pursue my dreams. It was the struggle that gave me the will to achieve my dreams and to find God's purpose in my life. In his word in Romans 5:5 says that there is glory in tribulations, knowing that tribulations work patience, and patience experience, and experience hope, and hope maketh not ashamed. It was in him and his word that I discovered the extraordinary power within. He equipped me with the same characteristics of my ancestors, my father, our Happy Creek community leaders, Dr. King. These traits had been inside of me all my life. He simply had to bring me to a place where I could hear his word. That same power is in each of us. All we have to do is to use it. Our children are going to school every day with the threat of violence. Dr. King was standing here or sitting in front of you today, he would be asking, how long will our children have to go to school in fear? At 79 years old, I continue to use my voice and my voting power. I live Dr. King's dream of sons and daughters of former slaves and former slave owners at the table of brotherhood. I continue to dream of a nation where we are not judged by the color of our skin, and a nation where there is equality and justice for all. Thank you. I will now entertain your questions. And don't tell me that you don't have any questions, because I purposely left out things so that you could ask me questions. So
Well, that's a wonderful start, Betty. That's really quite a story to hear, and it really brings a lot of things home. So thank you very much for that start. So let's go with the questions then. Who's got a question? And Katie, can you or Priyanka help out with kind of managing the questions if we got questions coming up? Hello?
He's not
Yeah,
on right now.
It's probably easier if you just unmute yourself and ask Betty questions. Betty, I was wondering, how old were you when the case started?
I was
And then I see
13.
Phyllis. 13.
I was 13 when the case started, and I was 14 when I walked up the hill the first day that we entered Warren County High School. Oh, and
That sure hits home. My daughter's 14 and just started high school. I'm just feeling for you, man.
and this is what I looked like. This picture was taken on September the 15th, 1958.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me,
Yes,
Betty? Yes,
yes.
thank you for this presentation. I learned so much, especially about Virginia. My parents were from Pascagoula, Mississippi, and my mother had to move from her town to New Orleans just to go to high school because they didn't have one for colored children. So I was born in 1953 out here in California. So I followed a lot of this on the news. So I'm glad to meet you. I'm so proud of your accomplishments. But the question that I have is, how are the schools now? I keep hearing reports that schools are even more segregated now than before. So do you have any commentary or from your personal experience about that today?
Most of my kids have graduated from school.
Yes,
Most of my grandchildren have graduated and are in college.
yes,
And I have 3 great grandchildren that are in elementary school. They, when you get to a small county and a small town like
Yes.
Warren County, you only
Mhm.
have maybe 4% African American in that
Mhm.
whole town.
Mhm.
So there is no more segregated schools. Everything is integrated.
Okay.
Um, you know, because there is not enough the population. So
Okay.
every locality is different. And I can
Okay.
imagine if I lived in the big city experience, and
Yes.
I do watch the news and I don't have my head buried in the sand. So I have
Good.
heard the same thing that you've heard, because it's not difficult to people to move to a certain community. And
Yes.
then my biggest concern today is the vouchers, where
What are
people,
the vouchers? What
well,
is
you
that?
know, I just
My
came,
son is 42, so that's
I
why I'm
was,
trying to.
I was
Yeah.
living in Texas, and
Mhm.
they wanted to reinstate the voucher program where you
Mhm.
could get a voucher to go to any school that you want. And
Mm.
you don't, you know, you're not paying for it, your private school, you're using public funds for it. So
Oh,
that's the biggest concern that I have today.
okay. Interesting. The clip that I saw was about New York City, so I'm glad you reminded me about the differences between the smaller communities and then the large urban communities. I guess they were saying New York schools are even more segregated now. So thank you again, and I'm impressed. And so, what did you do once you finished high school? Did you continue your education? And then that's my last question.
I was so messed up by the time that I finished high school. I couldn't
Traumatized, yes.
I couldn't get into college.
Okay.
There was nothing for me to do except to get married and have children. And
Yes.
I started off doing domestic work, doing that
Mm-hmm.
same kind of work that my mother was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided that that was not for me. So I would
Yes.
rather be married. And my husband went to college, and I helped him to get through college. And like my
Okay.
mom and daddy, we started having children, and before
Mm-hmm.
you knew it, we had 4 children. But I
Okay.
did go back, and today I am addressed, when I choose to use it, as Dr. Betty Kilby Fisher Bald.
Oh, where did you earn your doctorate? I've worked on mine since 2012. And then I'll stop with the questions. Where did you get your doctorate? Dr. Betty.
I have an honorary doctorate degree from
Okay.
Shenandoah University because I spoke at the commencement exercise. And
Okay.
had I not gotten custody of 2 of my grandchildren, I was planning on going back to school. So
Okay.
God just blessed me to get it that way.
Good. Congratulations. I'm glad. And what is your book? Would you put that up again? I want to take a screenshot because one of my books is going to Frankfurt Book Festival.
Okay, do this.
Oh,
Betty
okay.
Kilby,
Can you
BettyKilby.com.
bettykilby.com. Okay, let me take a screenshot. Hold on. And that's where I can get it because as I said, I have a book going to the Frankfurt Book Festival again this year. And I made a special effort to make sure that we have representation because I have family that fought in World War II in Europe and in the Pacific. And they've had this book festival since the year 1450 when the Gutenberg press was invented and when they used to tell us there was nothing. But my book will be there, and I want to promote some other authors too, just to keep.
Reach out to me on
Yes.
BettyKilby.com, and then just
Okay.
do the contact us.
Okay, I'll do that. I'm Phyllis. Thanks a lot.
Okay, Phyllis, good to meet you.
Yes.
Yes, Sally.
Question. When your children and grandchildren were in integrated schools, did they make friends across the races? Did they have white friends or did they stay pretty much to themselves?
No, my kids had white friends. I purposely did not tell them about my experience in Warren County High School and desegregating the schools. When my daughter went to school and they were studying that era in history, the teacher told my daughter, go home and ask your mama. And so my daughter came home and asked me about desegregating the schools. And that's when I began to tell my children. But my children, not only did when I told them, I taught my children the same respect that I wanted from everyone else. I don't want you to judge a person by the color of their skin or what race they are from. I want you to judge them by the content of their character. And so I taught them that because of my experience. And so today, my family is a rose garden. I have grandchildren so white you wouldn't be able to tell who they are, but they are pleased with who they are. And they talk about their Mima and how she wanted to see all of God's children loving one another. So even though no matter what she went through, she has no prejudices.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, and you know, my second book is Cousins. And this is where I sit down with the slave owning family. So when I say Dr. Martin Luther King was my hero, when in this book, you'll find me sitting down, just as I said, sitting down, living Dr. Martin Luther King's dream as sons and daughters of former slaves and former slaveholders at the table of brotherhood. And that's the goal of where we all should be to be able to sit down together as brothers and sisters.
Betty, in your story, there's a lot of will and determination exhibited throughout all of your life. But the character that really impresses me is your father, who came from the background that he came from, and with nothing but a fourth grade education, the way he handled things and made such a step forward is incredibly impressive. And I just wonder, how long did he live, and how much did he see of the family that's created through his efforts? How much did he experience the success that he passed on to the rest of his family?
He lived to see my brother John graduate from Fisk University.
Mm.
And part of the story that I didn't tell you is when my brother James, who was the first to graduate, we got into a fighting altercation. And to keep my brother John out of jail, my brother James had to leave the town, and he pled guilty to a rock throwing event. So he couldn't go into the military.
Mm.
So, but he did see him go to work at the White House.
Mm.
He saw him join the National Guard. My sister Patricia, he saw her become Dr. Patricia Kilby Robb. He died just before I became doctor. But he lived to see his dream of an education and his children succeeding. He saw my baby brother, he saw him graduate from Howard University. So he saw all of his children graduate from college and go on to be successful, and some going on to be rebels just like him.
That's really wonderful. That makes me feel better to know that he was able to appreciate some of what he had accomplished.
And the way that my father learned is, and this is in the book, he got the newspaper, and with his meager education, he read the newspaper over and over again. And as we became educated, we had to listen to him, and we had to help him with his reading.
Wow.
Wilson?
Oh no, I just was um I didn't have my hand up, but thank you. I'm just
My
listening.
father's name was James Wilson Kilby.
It's a good name.
Yes, it is. Okay, Charles, you got to take your off mute, unmute yourself.
Dick, can you help him? Can you unmute him?
Let's see if I can find, you know, I have trouble moving around. Katie, can one of you guys go in and unmute Charles? I don't think we can unmute anybody, you know, that the Zoom is set up so that people have to unmute themselves. You could
Okay,
send a
so
request that says, ask to
yeah.
unmute.
Charles, can you look at the bottom of your screen and see the little pictures, the little images? There should be one that has an audio microphone. If you click it, it'll unmute you. You can't see it?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. There you go. You found it.
There you go. Congratulations.
Yeah, I received the invite to my phone and I couldn't get on my computer. And this is the first time I've been in Zoom meeting with my phone, so I apologize for that.
No worries.
But Dr. Baldwin, I just want to thank you for your comment, your testimony, and everything like that. I'm an ambassador for Sankofa, and that's headed by Charlene Davis. She sent me the invite. We were at a summit this Tuesday and Wednesday in Burbank, and we had a lot of eco systems or different sectors there, from Northern California to Southern California to Imperial Valley. And I've heard a lot of stories, but I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. You made a statement today that was just so profound to me. I got chills and I had to write it down. And when you stated that you don't die, but you know what death feels like, my hat goes off to you on that, because I know a lot of people say, I wish I was dead. I wish this, but to know what death feels like, I mean, that has to be, I mean, it's just profound to me. And then for you to be in that situation and then to recover is just amazing. And I've been volunteering my time. I mentor second and third graders. I'm a deacon at my church. I'm a chaplain with the American Legions. And I'm out here trying to do the best that I can do. And every time I hear somebody that tells a story, especially as profound as you have mentioned today, I'm just in awe, and it energizes me to do more. And once again, I thank you, Dr. Baldwin.
And I thank you for your comments.
Where are you living now, Dr. Baldwin?
I am living
What
in
state?
Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay. Very
s-
good.
I
This, go ahead.
spent 6 months in Birmingham, Alabama,
Mm,
attending the church where the
Mhm.
4 little girls were
Mhm.
killed on September the 15th, 1963. And
Yes.
when that church bombing occurred, I had
Mhm.
just graduated, and I asked God why he took them so suddenly, and
Mhm.
I had to endure what I did. And it was because he had something else for me to do. And that period in my life was just a preparation. So
Yes.
I went to that church the whole time that I was living in Birmingham, trying to figure out what God wanted me to do now.
Yes. Yes. I understand. I was 10 years old and I was in California, and it just didn't, you know what happened, but I didn't understand it. But I understand a lot more now. I think that's why I wrote this book. That's going to Frankfurt.
What's the
And
title of your book?
it's called Stalker. And it's based on real very scary, horrible cases. But what we go through and what we have gone through as a people mimics a lot of what is in the book. So I had to pause several times because it's based on facts. Then I wrote a fictional part. So I put the cover on there, and then I put a marketing sheet that is available to hand out. So I think it's somewhat ironic, but it's accepted. It's going to Frankfurt. And it took me years to even consider going there or doing business. So what we've lived through is important. It's important to tell your story and to see the similarities because it's not just one group of people. Your story is important. Everyone's story is important. And I'm really glad to meet you. I didn't realize, I'm glad you reminded me that you are the cousin, the other cousin in the second book. And I mentioned it to Mr. Myers because I discovered my family history that has a lot of colors. It's a rainbow coalition, as I told someone, saints and sinners. Um, so again, I'm excited, and I will stop. Excited, and I could talk all day. As a professor, I have to censor myself, but I'll stop. You can check out my book. It's on Lulu, and I'm going to check out your book. And if I can have a book chat during Frankfurt, I will. It'll probably be on YouTube. But God
Okay.
bless you, and thanks again.
Thank you.
And Phyllis, I just want to point out to you that Betty and Phoebe, her cousin, did a presentation for us back in the spring of 2021, and it's recorded and up on our website. So you have a chance, you can go back and take a look at what they did as the presentation there. And of course, the book, of course, is available too.
Sally?
Yeah. I just wanted to share a couple of experiences. As a white person from New England, I did live in the South. I married someone from Atlanta. And but when we were traveling from LA to Atlanta, we got bumped off in Birmingham because of weather. And my husband and I had made friends with a Black businesswoman on the plane. And when the three of us went to sit down in the airport in Birmingham to have lunch, they came and asked her to go sit in the hallway. This was in 1965. And that was just such a shock to me. I couldn't believe it. And then not only that, when I lived in Atlanta, being a Yankee, they're still fighting the war down there. And so I experienced discrimination and sort of exclusion. I was never able to make friends, except with the cooks in my mother's kitchen, in my mother-in-law's kitchen. They were wonderful women, and I loved them dearly. And I kept in touch with them long after I left Atlanta. But the only friends I really made in Atlanta were Black women. And so,
That's because we knew.
maybe I have a better understanding than some people because I actually lived in that situation.
Good. And I think that you have to live a situation before you can realize all of the pain and the agony and the joy of that relationship, because you experience all of those emotions.
Yes, I want to join in. As I said, I was raised in California, but my family made sure we'd always visit the family in Pascagoula and along the Gulf Coast. And I want to share one story. One of my uncles was married to a Creole woman from Thibodaux, Louisiana, and we went to his funeral. And just to show you how we were so apart from the realities that you live through, people in those areas, I had my auto club book, naive and not really knowing. And we got there, and they were talking about, well, where we could stay, because it was everyone was there for the funeral. And so me, trying to help, I said, well, I've got my auto club book here. And they just kind of laughed and smiled. They said, no, we can't use that. Then I tried using my French that I learned in high school, and they laughed and smiled again. So again, you really, you don't know, like you said, you lived through a lot, but when you come from some other place, they try to shelter us and protect us. And I appreciate that. But when we went to visit the family, they tried to school us too. So no, that auto club book was no good. The my French didn't work. They thought that was funny, and just all kind of things. No, we couldn't use that. So thank you again. You're a good reminder of what we all went through. I had family that lived in New Orleans, and I didn't realize what they went through to desegregate the schools until I met one of the ladies who were part of the attended the school my mother attended that went through the desegregation periods. The TEP Center is in New Orleans. So again, God bless you, and just keep telling your story.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll have a movie too.
Oh, well,
Couple movies.
my daughter's in California, and she's been there for 10 years, and she
Okay.
has worked and tried, and she's still working and still trying
Okay.
to make this a movie. It was my father's dream,
Yes.
and then I inherited his dream, and now she's inherited my dream. So society would rather stay away from the story. They want to choose the story that
Mhm.
has the minimal effect. In
Yes.
one of her negotiations in trying to get my story, and she was talking to this group of people, and they said that they would rather do the Little Rock story uh, because I think that it's less invasive. But the the journey was the same, whether it was in Little Rock or whether it was in Front Royal, Virginia, um,
Yes.
especially in the areas that was the first to integrate. I've read some of the books from some of the plaintiffs in Little Rock, and oddly enough, it's amazing how their story parallels my story, in as much as one of the girls said that she learned the 23rd Psalm, and she used that in one of the situations that she was involved. And as I was reading it, I was thinking, how can she in Little Rock, their parents be telling them the same thing that our parents was telling us in Virginia? But then I realized church is church,
Yes.
and been believers since the beginning of time. Um, and so it's no small wonder that we would all learn or have the same lesson.
One of the suggestions that I have is Ava DuVernay. She's also a UCLA alumni like me. I did my undergraduate work there. Studios, Array Studios, might be a good place to do some research
My
about.
daughter knows Ava.
Oh, good.
Yes,
Okay.
she
So they're
knows Ava.
working on it.
Yes,
Okay, very good. That's good. The yeah, I'm just glad to meet you. And
thank you.
here's someone else.
Uh, Dr. Baldwin,
Yes,
do you talk to schools, high school students, and so on about your story?
I talk wherever I'm invited. I have
Yes,
talked
ma'am.
to schools and churches. Most of our talks have been in private schools, and we got invited to Virginia, and we didn't. We just said yes, and we had a wonderful experience, and we didn't know how that was possible, but it was not only possible, but we did it. So any school that I'm invited to, I go. Yeah,
I,
I
I was
do.
wondering, the reason I was asking is I grew up, I was born in 1938 and lived in North Carolina where I was born, in California, which had a very similar situation in the 60s. It wasn't legal segregation, but Berkeley City had segregated housing. For example, the James Raven version of Jim Crow. And what I'm wondering, kids today don't know about the past very much. How does they relate to your story, and what do they ask you about, and what do they take away?
Well, they take away well, one little child we spoke, and she was in elementary school, and she was wondering if I was okay. Now, here I am, a grown woman, and she's asking me, "Are you okay?"
Mhm.
She said, "I am so sorry that people treated you in that manner." You know, she said, "I am just so sorry." And we get all kinds of reactions. When I went to Germany, um, I spoke to DOD schools in Germany. And when I had the younger grades, we would all sit on the floor and I would tell them bits and pieces from my story, just enough for them to understand the history. And the kids are amazing. They really are, with with what they pick up from the story. And most of the kids are very sympathetic. And I know if you go on YouTube and you see the documentary Wit, Will, and Walls, the Betty Kilby story, I went to Winchester and I sit down with a group of kids, and those paintings in the background is based on the kids' analogy of what they heard me talk about, and you can see what they were thinking for yourself.
Hmm. Thank you.
Welcome.
Betty, you've had a lot of experience. You've seen a lot of things, been through an awful lot. I'd be interested in your general comments and observations on where you think we are today. You know, what's the world today, and what's the challenges, and what can we do?
I don't know what kind of group you have there and how honest I can be about what I see. Um, Only to tell you that I am voting for a woman
Huh.
in this election, and she makes me proud to be an African American woman. I think that we have gone a long way. In the last part of the presentation, I talk about the school shootings and the children being in fear. And I think that that's probably the most hurtful part of where we are today. And then when I look back, I say we were children desegregating the schools. Parents taught their children hate. That's what made it so bad for me. And you know, though we've come a long way, I have to ask myself, far have we come when we look at the plight of our children today? How sympathetic are we to our children? You know, why do we allow the type of guns that children are able to obtain? Why do we have so many school shootings today? And I know that we are all um, seniors. We've all seen a lot of things, and we all feel that we can't do a whole lot to control what's going on in our nation. But the one thing that I must tell you is that you can vote and you can put people in who are going to take the guns off the street and protect our kids. So there's a whole lot of things that we can do as even as seniors that can help our nation to change.
Are you feeling optimistic or pessimistic looking
I'm
ahead?
feeling I'm feeling optimistic today. I am feeling optimistic. I think that tomorrow is going to be a great day.
Anyway.
Yes, Sally.
If I can get on there. Um, what do you have an explanation for why young black men especially are supporting Donald Trump? I do not
That's
understand this.
that's a loaded question. But since you ask, I am going to answer. You know, sometimes I wonder what's fake news and what's real. And I have no idea why a young Black man would support Donald Trump. I can't fathom why. Um, but then the other side of the coin is how real is is that are those news, you know?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. It's like you can't
And
be
and
sure.
and sometimes some people will do anything for the bucks. So, there's so many questions as to um the reality of the whole situation. So that's the perspective that I would go come from. Is it real? Is it fake news? Because there's so much talk about fake news, and I see so much of it when I turn on my phone that I have to ask,
Yeah.
oh, that's not real. Yep, that's not real.
Sometimes it's hard to tell because everything is so bizarre. But anyway, you make me feel a lot better.
May I,
Thank
Okay,
may I add
so
to that a little bit? Carlene,
sure.
yeah. So a few things. One, I do think that it's also important to remember that Black men are the second highest voting population that will vote for the Democrats. So Black women and then Black men. So even with the information about, yes, that there are Black men voting for Trump, out of the pop out of all groups, Black women and Black women are at the top. So I do think it's very important to always contextualize that and contextualize that 30 something percent of the electorate are white women. And so the difference for whether or not Biden wins versus Trump in terms of the percentage,
Right.
it still will end up falling with white women. And then also for Black men, they are still men. And so some of the same issues that have been happening in this feeling amongst men, period, that the Democratic Party is not addressing their concerns as men, Black men experience that as well. So I just wanted to put that little perspective in there, that that's also the case.
Yeah.
Thank you for the help, Charlene.
Yeah, well, there is that. Talking about that, Black men or just men in general, I noticed there's a story today that the Teamsters Union is not endorsing anybody.
Mhm.
And I read the statement from the Teamsters, and one of the reasons was the majority of the Teamsters members voted for Trump. Not a large number, but there was not a majority for Kamala Harris.
Mhm.
And the Teamsters organization did not get from her the support for their right to vote, strike, and some other important labor issues that they would expect to get from a Democrat.
Mhm.
And so they stayed on the fence, which is an awkward the story of a working class person and a man is still a pretty gruesome one in many respects. That they have to work hard and even organize Teamsters, which is a pretty protective union, does not get what it wants in the power situation. There's a sense from some people, I think, that the ordinary person is alienated from the people running both parties, the wealthy donors. So that I think in situations like that, especially Black men or whatever, you vote or you feel what is hitting you in the gut in your life. And when we're talking about progress, especially, and what we're doing, this is a historic moment that a woman of color, and not just Black, but in East Indian, can actually come back and have a good fight to be president, says a lot. But it also opens up the sorts of things that we're still struggling with. And I see in these stories a duty of people like Dr. Baldwin and other people to help people remember what happened and teach how not to hate, how to continue, even when you say things are looking pretty good, they can't be kept good if people just let it slide and don't really, he said, how honest, you said, how honest can she be? Frankly, if you have to worry about having to be honest, we still have a problem. But I think we also have a duty, and I speak of myself as a white Southern male, a duty to stand up and vocalize and work to say this is what we as a nation should do and can do, and not let it slide and give it over to the people who are doing fake news or whatever they do or playing to people's fears. There
Yeah.
is, we got to do something, and we are doing it. We could
Well,
do it.
what about the fake history that is taught in the schools? That is
Yeah.
appalling to me that some school systems can arbitrarily change history and
Yes,
take
trying to
out the truth.
erase, yes, erasing the history, including labor and the
Yeah,
unions. If one just looks at you can Google that or do a YouTube on how they busted the unions, Ford Company, my father and the Pullman Porters. He always reminded me of the Pullman Porters, A. Philip Randolph. He was a postal worker and a union organizer too. So they cannot just erase the facts. And there's plenty of documentation just in case people, you can't ignore it. These are facts. And I'm glad I've met Dr. Betty just to remind people that this is real. And when they talk about this Project 2025, these are the facts that some people are trying to erase and ignore and lull you into a false sense of positive outcome.
I just want to comment too, Will, on the Teamsters that I was listening to the news, and a number of the local chapters of the Teamsters have endorsed
yes.
Kamala Harris. So it's not,
Californian among, yeah.
well, yeah, Michigan, I think, was another one that a big chapter. And so there are Teamster chapters which are coming out and endorsing Kamala Harris, in spite of the fact that the overall Teamsters will
Yeah,
not.
yeah,
Hey, Will,
yes.
I'm gonna apologize for what I'm about to say first. But when you invite me to your house, I'm not coming into your house and insulting you if I can
No,
prevent it. And
no,
that's the only reason that I would be silent in or ask you how honest that you want me to be. Because
sure.
I'm not coming to your house and insult you.
That
Uh,
I respect that also because I think part of doing the work is being respectful of the people you work with. And I appreciate that. You're welcome in my house anyhow. It's a little messy, but you're welcome.
I think the challenge that we look at is how can you be honest and respectful at the same time?
Yeah,
And that's the important thing to try to learn and understand and work with.
you know, you're not going to get everybody. And so it depends on where you are. And in this particular group is the only place that I'm talking to and about. Now, when I go to certain places where I am here today, I go one-on-one to talk to people because I want to respect everybody's feelings. And, I'm not going, if you have your mind made up on a certain issue, I'm not going to change it. But I can talk to you and I can talk one-on-one more so than I can talk to a group unless I'm invited to that group to talk about those things.
hmm,
So there's a whole lot of things to consider. And and as my son used to say, I don't back down from a fight. I'm not afraid of a fight. Yeah.
I'm sorry I have to leave, but I have to go to lunch. I live in a facility. I don't want them to close the dining room before I get there.
huh,
Well, thank
This
you,
was
Sally,
wonderful. Thank
for
you.
being with
I
us.
learned a lot.
yeah.
Well, what else? Somebody else have any kind of question or comment that they would like to make about this visit?
Katie, you're gonna mute, Katie. Unmute yourself.
Can you
There you
hear me?
go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I have a question about the Brown decision. What was the attorney, or who was the attorney that your dad and other people went to fight, and get integrated? Was he Caucasian or was he Black?
He was Black. He was Oliver W. Hill.
Oh, okay. I'm surprised he had success.
Well, it's like it was the Supreme Court that actually made the decision. And it was Justice Warren that networked internally to bring about that decision.
Okay. Thank you also for coming and sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Am I correct that he worked to make it a unanimous decision? I don't remember, but I think it was.
Yes, yes. He wanted a unanimous decision, and I think that that was probably the only way that it was going to work. And so he networked amongst the other justices. He took the lead on the position and made sure that they got a unanimous decision.
Well, we have a different Supreme Court now, and that's part of our problem.
Yeah,
So
sure.
we
Well, I
have a
wonder
lot of
if
work. Yeah.
would this court have made the same decision? Because it's not one of the hot button issues that they're worried about. Women's rights and other things come in there. But would it be possible? Because Earl Warren was a fairly conservative person. I believe he was a Republican from California. And this was an issue which crossed political boundaries also because it was fighting battles that California kind of thought it had won, erroneously,
Yeah.
but that you can be surprised by some group that you would think would vote one way and wouldn't vote another. Justice Black from Alabama comes to mind, and that sort of the whole business of who does where. I personally hesitate to label somebody globally because we are made up of many parts. And when you appeal to the parts that you can relate to and put aside the parts you don't relate to, you give that person a chance to be heard in all of their complexity and richness, and rather just because they are. I make an exception for Donald Trump, but that's another story.
Yeah. Well, all I can say to that, Will, is I wouldn't bet a nickel on that proposition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you notice it's like we weren't there, and I don't know, but I've seen documentaries where Justice Warren went to the other justices on a one-on-one
Yeah.
basis, and he appealed to them, and he was successful. And that's why I believe that one-on-one you can get a better
Yeah.
understanding of people. And if you want to change a person's mind, that's probably the best way to do it.
I just want to add something. I was honored enough to have my mother take me to hear Martin Luther King speak, probably about 63 or 64 or something like that. And I have to say, of the three big assassinations in the 60s, that one affected me more, the Martin Luther King murder. Just devastated me.
I agree. Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have another question about healthcare. Everyone in Pascagoula, my parents and my brother and sister were born at my grandmother's house, my father across the street, and they were born by midwives. Did you have midwives when you were born, or any doctors or hospitals?
My brother, the three of us who were involved in desegregation from my family were born with midwives. my younger sister and my younger brother were born in the hospital. I don't know if there's any relation to that analogy or not, but I was told that my mother almost died when she had me.
Yes. I've learned so much. When I started my doctoral work, I did a lot in healthcare and I'm still looking at it. And those are the differences. Working with Charles Drew University, they have a movie about Jim Crow and the fight to have, I guess, by Lyndon Johnson bringing in Medicare. And they have a movie that shows the midwives. So I was born in the hospital here in Los Angeles, Queen of Angels. But my brother, older brother, and older sister were born at my grandmother's house in Pascagoula by midwives. So those are some of the differences that I'm aware of, my family and I have lived through. And as they say, no, not going back to any of that. And I'm glad we have voices to explain why. And a lot of people died in the process. Well, they're dying now in childbirth. My mother had 5 miscarriages before I was born. So it's a real reality that has to be faced.
Anybody else have anything they'd like to bring up or comment on?
I have one thing. Fairly recently, I heard someone, an activist in the civil rights movement, refer to white people as privileged. And I think that's true, but it nonetheless hurt. What is your feeling about that?
I know that Phoebe and I talk about white people having privilege. And I know that sometimes we talk in generalities. We also realize that not every white person exercise their privilege because they don't have it when it comes to certain things. But even with Phoebe being white, and when we were fighting the school board, trying to get the school to be named after my father, there were things that Phoebe could get with her white privilege that we could never have gotten or
Yeah.
did get. So, yeah, whiteness has been a privilege, continues to be a privilege.
Yeah.
Yep.
I've thought about this white privilege thing a bit, and I have, in my driving around in the countryside, I've been stopped by the police for speeding or broken lights or various kinds of things, and I never feared for my life when I got stopped by a police officer, and that is a white privilege.
Yeah. Boy, yeah.
Yep, I got stopped in Front Royal, Virginia, when and it hasn't been that long ago. And I got a ticket and I ended up paying it because this old fighter didn't have any fight left in her when those 2 cops pulled up behind me. But I did ask why it took so many cops to pull up behind me for a mere speeding ticket. And it was something like going 30 in a 25-mile zone, or it was a legitimate stop. But why did it take 2 police cars? And he said that the other police car was in the neighborhood. But I still got that feeling of panic when I was.
I bet.
There's a song that Nina Simone sings, and the name of it is "I Wish I Could Know How It Feels to Be Free." And as I think about that, and someone saying something like that in all earnestness, I never thought about that. And that's a white privilege.
Yes.
So that we need to think, it's really a definition of what is white privilege, and it's pretty broad. And it's not just having advantage in certain encounters. It goes way beyond that into just a whole freedom of living that that you have when you're white and you think it's normal, but your friend and neighbor who's a different color doesn't have that same freedom.
That's right.
I
Yeah.
want to chime in on that one because one story, I had 7 uncles from
Mhm.
Pascagoula. They moved except for one who stayed to take care of my grandmother. And I remember one uncle, Willie, told me he was often approached when he was a Pullman porter. When he came to Los Angeles, he had Spanish speaking people come up speaking Spanish. So you can imagine what he looked like. But his family was all different complexions. But I remember he said jokingly he had to wrap his head in a turban just to go into one restaurant to get a meal, in the front door to get a meal. Now, he joked, but I don't know. You never know. The other question or statement, I was a U.S. Foreign Service officer hired in Washington, D.C., and we went for training before we were deployed to Africa and the poorest of the poor. We drove through Virginia, Fort Royal, to West Virginia. And I think of it now, ironically, that's where they gave us the training before they sent us to the third world countries to do the USAID and State Department work. So that just gives you a different viewpoint of where they thought we needed training. They didn't send us to Mississippi now, which I still haven't, but they sent us to West Virginia on the way through Virginia before we went to Africa. I was deployed to Africa, but all over the world, Philippines, etc. So that tells you something there. It might be also a statement about class.
I don't know if you can see this or not. This is a picture of my 2 daughters. This one here, you can see that she is very fair-skinned and she could pass for white if she so desired. She had interstitial lung disease. She was in the University of Alabama Hospital. She got her heart and lung transplant. And Renee has said she felt like a chameleon because there were so many times in her life when she could pass for white and she knew that white privilege. And we believe that had she been maybe more of the brownish hue, she may not have had the support that she had at UAB Hospital because prejudices exist. But we laugh and we say we think that her white privilege saved her life because she got her heart and lung transplant and she lives today.
Well, building on the white privilege story, I actually prefer the term European privilege. It's not, I understand the power of the term white privilege because we are in a Europe-centered culture. We speak English, which is the native language of 2/3 of my ancestors. We have a large Christian possibility, which is a European religion in its power structure. We are beneficiaries of the European conquest of the Americas, and we are the norms. If you look at how people dress up in the world to go to conferences of the high and mighty, almost everybody wears European clothing. And this is that in itself being the norm is a huge privilege that we don't have to conquer. And what I find fascinating about the current part of what America is doing is to some extent, and I say to some extent, we are learning about the other cultures which contributed to our society and learning how to integrate those cultural norms and practices into what it means to be American. And I favor the trend. I'm a bit discouraged about how slow the trend is, but I think it's there and something we can learn to be more of a multicultural nation that we talked about in the beginning. In that I am optimistic. Comment on optimism. I know a guy named Amory Lovins, who's an energy efficiency expert, well regarded. And as you know, the whole issue of energy efficiency and global warming is a very discouraging field to be in. And somebody said, Amory, are you optimist or a pessimist? And Amory says, well, no, I'm neither. I believe in applied hope. So dealing with issues like this, applied hope is a position that you can learn to deal with.
I think that's a good expression. I like that.
I like that.
All right. Well, if there are no more questions, if that's it, all I can say is thank you very much, Betty. This is, and Dr. Betty, I guess. I have to call you Dr. Betty now. But this has really been wonderful, and I really appreciate the time that you have taken. I think it's very enlightening, and I have enjoyed the whole experience, and look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Ditto. Yeah. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, I'll close up. Come back and see us. We've got more events coming up in the future that I think will be of interest. One of the things that I'm hoping to do is get an author named Lynn Hudson, who has written a book called West of Jim Crow. And what she has done as a historian is documenting some of the practices that we've been talking about here that occurred in Pasadena. She's from Pasadena and California, and Jim Crow is considered a Southern thing, but a lot of what Jim Crow was all about is scattered all over the country, and that's the point that her book brings out. So I'm hoping to have her as a guest in the future. I've got to work some connections there and see if we can get her. But we've got some other interesting presentations coming up in the future, and we look forward. This one will be posted on our YouTube channel and in a few days, maybe this coming week. Sometimes it takes us a little longer to get them up because of other pressures, but it will be up on YouTube, so you can look for it there, and you can tell your friends about it, who I think many people enjoy sitting and listening to this. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Betty.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate you.
And with that, we'll close up. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.